The idea that maybe DEI has gone too far misframes the stakes of the conversation and implies that somehow or another harm to white students is at stake. Not to suggest that Devin indicated, but that's often the tenor of the stakes. But what is really at stake are deeper principles that speak to quality education and a functioning democracy for everyone. The risk is that we slide backward as a society instead of moving forward. Our success domestically, internationally, politically, culturally, and educationally depends not on antiquated views of the world that pit groups against one another, or see the world as a zero-sum game, or that view it through a narrow lens. Our success depends on exposing students to as many perspectives as possible, instilling tolerance and civility, and preparing them for a global workplace and a complex political environment that they will enter. To be clear, however, while our concept of DEI should include more than just obvious categories like race, it's important to recognize that racial diversity has specific educational and social benefits. If stereotypes and essentializing individuals are a problem that's holding society back, exposure to racial diversity is the key to breaking down stereotypes. If racial divisions are part of what is fraying our cultural bonds, then diverse environments are a means to mending those bonds. Decades of studies demonstrate that students who attended racially diverse schools, in K through 12, for instance, have better civic outcomes. They are more tolerant, more civically engaged, and tend to make different life choices regarding where to live, where to send their kids to school, and more. And these things have long-term impacts on society. Next point, the idea that diversity undermines or is at odds with merit rests on a false premise. This argument assumes that there's some singular objective measure of merit out there, when no such thing exists. Even the best measures that we have currently cannot be assessed in isolation. Take, for example, high school GPA. Does the student with a 3.85 GPA from Columbia's very best high school, where 75% of the students are career and college ready, have more or less merit than the student with a 3.95 GPA from a small, poor, rural high school where only 1/3 of students are college and career ready? Actually, I don't think there's an obvious answer to that question. Assessing merit, or the elusive concept of potential, involves relative assessments of students based upon multiple factors. One important aspect of merit and potential is what we as educators often call miles traveled. The child of a low-income single mother who speaks English as a second language and who earned a 3.85 GPA has almost certainly traveled a longer road than the child in a two-parent, middle-income household who earned a 3.85, the same GPA, in the same school. There are a number of factors that are crucially important to assessing the length of the road traveled and thus the merit of students. Those factors include socioeconomic status, language status, familial status, parental education attainment, disability, personal trauma, and more. And because we live in a world where race, unfortunately, still so often matters for things big and small, things like getting pulled over for slow rolling through a stop sign, or being accused of shoplifting or not paying as you approach the counter, I would put to you that race, too, still, unfortunately, remains one of those factors. Yet at the same time, it is also true that race and ethnicity do not automatically tell us what the lived experience of any individual person is. Let me now move to the issue of equity. Equal access to the learning environment requires active efforts by educators. Consider a popular teacher, not me, who has a seating policy that indicates that students can select their own seats on a first-come, first-served basis. And on the first day of class, students rush to the front of the room to grab seats, unlike these empty ones over here. Now consider a visually impaired student who couldn't beat the rush and is now sitting on the back row. Should the teacher nix her seating policy? Should she create a special exception for this student? Should she just start writing much larger on the board, even though that's going to slow down class? Should she ignore the problem altogether, or something else? Consider Howard University Law School, where I taught for the better part of a decade. Well into the 2000s, you could count the number of tenured female faculty on one hand. In a prior era, when the law school first moved into its current building at Van Ness Street, I don't think there were any female faculty members. And as a result, all the faculty bathrooms, all of them, on the second, third, and fourth floors were assigned to males. By the time I got there, things had changed a little. There were a few female faculty, and a couple of bathrooms were reassigned such that there was one female bathroom on 2 of the 3 floors. The rest were for males. To be clear, Howard is not unique in this respect. This University of South Carolina, in its old building, had similar inequities and adjustments over time regarding faculty bathrooms. The question is simple. Should institutions adjust bathroom allocations, for instance, over time, or just leave them as they've always been? And if the answer is that they should track the data on such things and consider adjustments when the facts warrant them, then on what basis would we ignore data regarding race and the possibility that we might need to make adjustments there? Now, some of you might say, yeah, but sex is different. In what way might race ever be relevant to an adjustment at a university? The frank answer is that the possible need for change might not always be obvious to those at the traditionally white institution, particularly those whose faculties and students remain overwhelmingly white. Asking the questions I would put to you is actually more important than knowing the answers in advance. But I would suggest to you, for instance, that maybe, hypothetically, a university's events, topics, and guest speakers might have skewed in one direction in the past, may have skewed ideologically, racially, or in some other direction, right? Or maybe less benignly, they skewed just towards the interest of the students who used to attend their schools. Maybe it was winter sports or rural recreation or the stock market. The skew wasn't discriminatory necessarily, but just a result of what the students wanted to hear about. But imagine that the university decided it would simply reinvite all the old speakers, rehost all the old events, and make life easier on the administrators and the faculty. Might such a university need to consciously evaluate its programming in light of who its students are now, or the possibility that it might want to attract a more diverse group of students? On these examples and questions, I would hope that nearly everyone in this room agrees. Other examples like admissions policies and curricular offerings and DEI offices strike slightly more sensitive nerve. Only a fool would try to convince you that there's only one answer as to how to fairly evaluate students for admission, or there's only one correct set of classes that a university should offer. Only a fool would try to convince you that the way our esteemed universities have pursued equity and diversity cannot be improved upon or has never involved a flaw. But I would put to you that equitable educational opportunities and diverse educational opportunities that enrich the environment for every student requires universities to be conscious and inquisitive as to how their policies affect students and the learning environment. In short, we must continue to ask questions that do not presuppose answers if we are to have equal educational opportunities. And that is what the best DEI programs should strive to do. Lastly, if the fear of DEI is discrimination against whites or males, you need fear no longer. The Constitution and any number of federal statutes have long prohibited racial quotas, have long prohibited awarding racial minorities bonus points in the admissions process, and any number of other practices that we might critique. Moreover, the goal of DEI has never been to harm one group at the expense of the other, but to enhance the educational environment for all students. DEI is not a zero-sum game in which making some students more welcome requires making other students less welcome. Thank you.